Hello, my name is Samantha Fowler. I'm 44 years old, and until 3 minutes ago, everyone at the Pinewood High School Class of '98 reunion thought I was just a cleaner. The ballroom at the Grand Wellington Hotel shimmered with nostalgic elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in burgundy cloth. A jazz trio played softly in the corner while former classmates clutched champagne flutes and reminisced about glory days that felt like lifetimes ago. I moved between the tables unnoticed, collecting empty glasses and wiping down surfaces. Another invisible woman in a gray uniform with Fowler stitched above the pocket. Then I heard her voice cut through the ambient chatter. Victoria Ashworth, formerly Victoria Chen before she married that pharmaceutical executive, stood in her designer cocktail dress, laughing with a circle of our former peers. Her voice carried that same superior tone it had held 25 years ago when she was head cheerleader and I was the quiet girl who ate lunch alone. "Oh my God, is that really Samantha?" she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Look at her. She's actually cleaning tables at our reunion? How pathetic is that?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it was something worse. Pity mixed with relief that their own lives hadn't turned out quite so disappointing. I kept moving. Head down, cleaning cloth in hand. My pulse remained steady. It never quickens anymore. Not after everything I've trained myself to endure. The dismissive comments weren't new. I'd heard variations of them for the past 18 months since I started working for Pristine Solutions cleaning service. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that I wasn't there just to clean up after their reunion. I was there because in exactly 3 minutes, everything they thought they knew about quiet little Samantha Fowler was about to shatter like fine china hitting concrete. You see, 18 months ago, my name wasn't a punchline whispered behind manicured hands. It was Colonel Samantha Fowler, United States Army Intelligence, commander of the most classified tactical operations unit in the European theater. For 12 years, I led missions that kept threats away from American soil, operations so sensitive that most generals didn't even know they existed. No medal ceremony, no public recognition, just quiet victories that let people like Victoria sleep safely in their suburban mansions. My office wasn't a supply closet filled with mop buckets and industrial bleach. It was a secure facility beneath Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where I coordinated intelligence networks across 3 continents. My uniform wasn't gray polyester with coffee stains. It was dress blues with silver eagles on my shoulders and a chest full of ribbons that told stories I could never share at cocktail parties. But that was before Brussels, before the operation that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine surveillance, tracking a suspected arms dealer through the diplomatic quarter. My team had been monitoring Dmitry Volkov for weeks, building a case that would shut down his network permanently. We had photographic evidence, financial records, enough documentation to put him away for life. Then, everything went wrong. The safe house was compromised. My team of 6 was ambushed during what should have been a simple handoff. When the smoke cleared and the sirens faded, 4 of my people were in body bags, and Dmitry Volkov had vanished like smoke. The official report blamed insufficient intelligence and poor tactical planning. My responsibility, they said. My failure. The review board was swift and merciless. Colonel Patricia Hardwick, who'd never spent a day in the field, led the inquiry. Her questions were sharp, designed to cut rather than clarify. "Did you properly assess the security situation, Colonel Fowler? Were you aware that your operational parameters exceeded authorized scope? Do you accept responsibility for the loss of personnel under your command?" I answered honestly. Yes, I took responsibility. Yes, as commanding officer, the ultimate accountability was mine. But what I tried to explain, what they refused to hear, was that someone had leaked our position. Someone with high-level access had sold us out. My security clearance was revoked before I left the hearing room. My command was terminated within 24 hours. By the end of the week, I was on a transport plane back to the States with a medical discharge notation in my file that would follow me forever. The transition to civilian life was brutal. You'd think 12 years of leadership experience would translate to the corporate world, but try explaining classified operations in a job interview. Try networking when you can't discuss what you've done for over a decade. Try building references when your former colleagues can't acknowledge they know you. The savings ran out after 8 months. The job applications became increasingly desperate. When Pristine Solutions offered me a position in cleaning office buildings and event spaces, I took it without hesitation. Honest work, they said. Flexible hours. No questions about my past. What they didn't mention was the invisibility. How people look through you when you're holding a mop. How conversations stop when you enter a room, not from respect, but from embarrassment. Theirs, not yours. How former classmates at high school reunions assume your life is a cautionary tale about not applying yourself. But invisibility has its advantages. When you're just the cleaning lady, people forget you have ears. They leave sensitive documents on desks. They have private conversations assuming you can't understand their importance. They make assumptions about your intelligence based on your uniform. What Victoria Ashworth and her circle of admirers didn't realize was that for the past hour, I'd been listening to their conversations while I worked. I'd heard Victoria bragging about her husband's pharmaceutical company's new defense contract. I'd listened to David Morrison discuss his consulting work with certain government agencies. I'd watched Rebecca Thorne flash photos of her husband's promotion to deputy director at the State Department. And I'd recognized something they hadn't noticed about their little reunion gathering. 3 people in this room were on a classified watch list I'd helped compile 2 years ago, not as targets, but as potential security risks due to their connections to foreign nationals and questionable financial activities. The same watch list that had led to the Brussels operation, the same operation that had cost 4 of my soldiers their lives. As I reached for an empty champagne glass near Victoria's table, my hand brushed against my jacket pocket. Inside was a small metal object I'd carried for 18 months, my colonel's eagle insignia, the silver bird that had once marked my rank and authority. I kept it close, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as proof of who I'd been when it mattered. The jazz trio finished their set, and the room grew momentarily quiet. That's when it happened. As I bent to retrieve a dropped napkin, the insignia slipped from my pocket and hit the marble floor with a sharp metallic ping that somehow managed to cut through the ambient noise. Victoria's conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye within 10 feet turned toward the small silver eagle lying at my feet. The room seemed to hold its breath as I slowly straightened, meeting Victoria's gaze for the first time all evening. "Oh my," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. That's a colonel's insignia." I bent down, picked up the small metal bird, and held it in my palm for everyone to see. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting, like greeting an old friend after a long separation. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned to suppress over the past 18 months. "It is." And that's when everything changed. The silence stretched across the ballroom like a taut wire ready to snap. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the confusion spreading across her face as she stared at the silver eagle in my palm. Around us, conversations died mid-sentence as more people noticed the small crowd gathering around what they'd assumed was just the cleaning lady. I don't understand," Victoria stammered, her champagne glass trembling slightly in her manicured fingers. "That's military, isn't it? But you're a cleaner." "Yes, I am. Now." David Morrison, who'd been bragging about his government consulting contracts just minutes earlier, stepped closer. His eyes narrowed as he studied the insignia. "That's not just any military insignia. That's a full-bird colonel. Army." The circle around me widened as more former classmates drifted over, drawn by the magnetic pull of confusion and scandal.
I could see the questions forming in their eyes, the calculations trying to reconcile the woman with the mop bucket and the symbol of military authority. Rebecca Thorne, whose husband worked at the State Department, spoke up with the tone of someone who'd attended too many Washington dinner parties. "Samantha, where exactly did you get that? Because if you're impersonating a military officer..." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the shy girl who used to copy my homework in algebra class. Now she stood there in her designer dress, ready to accuse me of stolen valor because the truth was too inconvenient to believe. "I didn't steal it, Rebecca," I said quietly. "I earned it." And then I told them who I really was. Colonel Samantha Fowler, United States Army Intelligence, serial number 456789012. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in 2001, promoted to colonel in 2018. For 12 years, I commanded the 47th Tactical Intelligence Squadron, specializing in counterterrorism operations across Europe and the Middle East. The words felt strange on my tongue after 18 months of silence, like speaking a language I'd almost forgotten. But as I spoke, I could feel something straightening in my spine, a posture that no amount of mopping floors could completely erase. Victoria's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible! You were nobody in high school. You ate lunch alone. You never even went to prom. People like you don't become colonels." "People like me," I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "You mean quiet people? Studious people? People who preferred books to popularity contests?" I slipped the insignia back into my pocket, but kept my hand there, feeling its familiar weight. "You want to know what people like me become, Victoria? We become the ones who keep people like you safe while you sleep in your comfortable beds, worrying about nothing more dangerous than whether your stock portfolio is performing well." David crossed his arms, skepticism written across his face. "Okay, let's say you're telling the truth. What's a colonel doing cleaning toilets? Did you get court-martialed or something?" The question hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known it was coming. This was the moment I dreaded, the part of the story that turned hero into cautionary tale. "No court-martial," I said evenly. "Medical discharge, post-traumatic stress, according to my file." I could see the pity creeping into their expressions, the same look I'd grown accustomed to over the past year and a half. But that wasn't the truth, not even close. The truth is more complicated, and it starts with understanding what the 47th Tactical Intelligence Squadron actually did. I looked around the circle of faces, some curious, others skeptical, all of them hanging on my words despite themselves. We weren't regular army. We weren't even regular intelligence. We were what you might call the surgical instrument in America's foreign policy toolbox. When conventional diplomacy failed and military action was too blunt, they sent us. Rebecca's husband worked at the State Department. She'd understand the implications. "You mean black ops?"
Gray ops, I corrected. The missions that exist in the space between official policy and necessary action. Stopping arms dealers before their weapons reach terrorist cells. Intercepting communications that could prevent attacks on American soil. Gathering intelligence on threats that our allies couldn't or wouldn't address through normal channels. I paused, watching their faces change as the magnitude of what I was telling them began to sink in. My team and I prevented 17 major terrorist attacks across Europe between 2019 and 2023. We disrupted weapons smuggling operations that would have armed insurgent groups in 3 different countries. We identified and neutralized cyber threats that could have crippled American infrastructure. The ballroom seemed to have grown quieter, as if my words were drawing people in from other conversations. I could see phones being discreetly pulled from purses and pockets. In a few minutes, this would be all over social media. None of it was public, I continued. No news conferences, no medal ceremonies, no photo ops with politicians. Just quiet victories that let you all continue living your lives without ever knowing how close danger had come. Victoria found her voice again, though it was smaller now, less certain. But if you were so important, so successful, what happened? Why are you here, cleaning up after us? This was the question I'd been avoiding for 18 months. The one that therapists had tried to get me to answer. The one that woke me up at 3 a.m. in my studio apartment above the dry cleaners. Brussels happened, I said simply. October 15th, 2023. I could still see it clearly. The narrow cobblestone street, the cafe where we'd planned to intercept Dmitry Volkov's career, the way the autumn light slanted through the windows of the safe house where my team was supposed to be secure. We'd been tracking an arms dealer named Volkov for 8 months. Russian national, but he worked for whoever paid best. Our intelligence suggested he was facilitating weapons sales to terrorist cells planning attacks on American targets in Europe. The operation was supposed to be routine. Surveillance, evidence gathering, coordinate with local law enforcement for arrest. My team had done dozens of similar missions. We knew the protocols, understood the risks. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting myself remember faces I'd tried so hard to forget. Sergeant Maria Santos, my communications specialist, 28 years old, new mother. Lieutenant James Crawford, demolitions expert, 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining my unit. Corporal David Kim, our tech specialist, fluent in 6 languages. Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, sniper, could hit a target at 800 meters in a crosswind. When I opened my eyes, the ballroom was completely silent. They died because someone leaked our position. Someone with access to classified operational details sold us out to Volkov's people. The safe house was compromised before we ever set foot in Brussels. My team walked into an ambush. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. No one moved to clean it up. I survived because I was late to the rendezvous. Traffic jam on the E40. 5 minutes that saved my life and cost 4 of my people theirs. The weight of those words settled over the crowd like a funeral shroud. These were people who'd lived comfortable lives, who understood tragedy only through news reports and movie screens. The reality of loss, of real consequence, was foreign to them. The investigation was swift. Too swift. The official report blamed intelligence failure, poor planning, insufficient security protocols. My responsibility as commanding officer. Case closed. David cleared his throat. But you said someone leaked your position. Didn't you fight it? I almost smiled at the question. I tried. For 6 months, I submitted reports, requested reviews, provided evidence that the leak had to have come from someone with high-level clearance. But dead soldiers don't generate headlines, and living colonels asking uncomfortable questions become inconvenient. So they discharged you, Rebecca said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. Medical discharge, PTSD, recommended for therapy and civilian reintegration support. A nice clean ending that didn't require anyone to admit that American military personnel had been betrayed by their own system. The jazz trio had returned from their break, but they weren't playing. Even they seemed to sense that something important was happening in the middle of their venue. And that's how Colonel Samantha Fowler became just Samantha, cleaning lady, I concluded. Because sometimes the system protects itself by sacrificing the people who serve it best. Victoria looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Around us, the reunion had effectively stopped. 200 people who'd come to relive their high school glory days were instead confronting the reality of what real service and real sacrifice looked like. I bent down and began collecting the shards of Victoria's broken champagne glass, the sound of crystal against marble sharp in the silence. The thing is, I said as I worked, I made peace with it. Lost careers, broken dreams, invisible work. None of that changes what we accomplished. 4 of my people died, but the intelligence they gathered prevented attacks that would have killed hundreds of civilians. That matters more than rank or recognition. I stood up, the broken glass cupped in my cleaning cloth, and looked around the circle of stunned faces. Besides, I added with the first genuine smile I'd felt all evening, There's dignity in honest work, even cleaning work. Something a lot of you might want to remember. Because what I hadn't told them yet was why I was really here tonight, and why, in exactly 30 minutes, this reunion was going to become much more interesting. The crowd had mostly returned to their tables, but the energy in the room had shifted. Conversations were muted, punctuated by furtive glances in my direction. I resumed my cleaning duties, moving methodically between tables, but I could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes tracking my movements. The invisible cleaning lady had become the most watched person in the room. What they didn't know was that I hadn't come to this reunion by accident. 3 weeks ago, I'd been scrubbing floors at the Meridian Corporate Center when I overheard something that made my blood run cold. It was 11 p.m., well past normal business hours, and I was cleaning the executive offices on the 37th floor. Most of the building was empty, which is why I heard the voices coming from the corner office, clear and unguarded in the silence. "The Brussels operation was cleaner than we expected," a man's voice said. I had frozen with my mop halfway across the marble floor, recognizing the voice immediately. Thomas Harrington, CEO of Harrington Defense Solutions, one of the largest private military contractors in the world. "Fowler's team was eliminated before they could complete their investigation," came the reply, a woman's voice, crisp and professional. "The leak served its purpose perfectly." I'd crept closer to the office door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the crack in the door, I could see two figures silhouetted against the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "And Fowler herself?" Harrington asked. "Neutralized. Medical discharge, PTSD designation. Even if she suspected the truth, no one would believe a broken-down ex-soldier with a mental health record." The woman stepped into the light, and I'd nearly gasped out loud. Senator Patricia Graves, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the same committee that had rubber-stamped my discharge 18 months ago. "The Volkov network is still operational," Harrington continued. "Better than operational. With the military intelligence unit eliminated, our European arms sales have increased by 40%. Volkov sends his regards, by the way. He was quite pleased with how efficiently we handled the problem." I'd stood there in the hallway, invisible in my gray uniform, listening to two of the most powerful people in American defense policy casually discuss the murder of my soldiers like it was a quarterly earnings report. "The weapons shipments to the Middle East are proceeding on schedule," Senator Graves had continued. "Without military intelligence interference, we should see substantial profits from the regional conflicts over the next 2 years." Excellent. "And if anyone else gets too curious about Brussels, we handle them the same way we handled Fowler's team. The beauty of the system is that patriotic soldiers always follow orders, even when those orders lead them into ambushes." That's when I'd understood the full scope of what had happened to us. My team hadn't died because of intelligence failure or poor planning. They'd been murdered by their own government, sacrificed so that corrupt officials could profit from illegal arms sales to terrorist organizations. I'd finished cleaning that office floor with mechanical precision, my mind racing through the implications. Harrington Defense Solutions held billions in government contracts. Senator Graves controlled military intelligence oversight. Together, they could orchestrate operations, eliminate threats, and profit from the chaos they created. And I was the only person left alive who knew the truth. The next morning, I'd submitted my resignation to Pristine Solutions and began planning. 18 months of invisibility had taught me valuable lessons about moving unnoticed, about gathering information, and about the power of being underestimated. I might not have my military rank anymore, but I still had my training. The first step was verification. Using skills I'd learned in intelligence work, I began tracking financial records, communication patterns, and operational timelines. What I found was a conspiracy that reached from corporate boardrooms to the highest levels of government. Harrington Defense Solutions had been selling weapons to known terrorist organizations through intermediaries like Dmitry Volkov. The profits were staggering.
billions of dollars in illegal arms sales disguised as legitimate international defense contracts. But the operation required eliminating military intelligence units that might discover the truth. My team had been the first, but we weren't the last. Over the past 18 months, 3 other specialized military units had been compromised during operations against arms dealers. 17 more soldiers dead, their deaths attributed to intelligence failures and operational mistakes. All investigated by Senator Graves' committee. All cases closed without further inquiry. But I'd made a mistake 3 weeks ago. In my eagerness to gather evidence, I'd accessed financial databases using skills that were supposed to be forgotten. Someone had noticed the intrusion patterns, the sophisticated techniques that suggested military intelligence training. 2 days later, I'd received a phone call on a number I'd never given to anyone. "Colonel Fowler?" The voice was electronically distorted, but the military bearing was unmistakable. "My name is Agent Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to talk." We'd met in a parking garage downtown, all shadows and whispered conversations, like something from a spy novel. Agent Harrison was younger than I had expected, maybe 35, with the lean build and alert eyes of someone who'd spent time in dangerous places. "We've been monitoring communications related to the Brussels incident," he told me without preamble. "Your name came up in context that suggests the official story was incomplete." I'd almost laughed at the euphemism. "You mean my soldiers were murdered by traitors in our own government?"
We have suspicions, but no proof. Senator Graves' committee has classification authority that blocks most investigation avenues. We need someone with operational experience and legitimate access to gather evidence. Someone expendable, you mean? Harrison had studied me for a long moment. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Someone who understands that 17 soldiers deserve justice, not just 4. That's when he'd told me about the reunion. Thomas Harrington's daughter, Amanda Harrington, Price, was in my graduating class. She'd be attending tonight's event, along with her father, who was scheduled to give a speech about supporting our veterans and presenting a donation check to a military charity. The irony was so thick it was almost choking. Harrington will be here tonight to maintain his patriotic image, Harrison had explained. But he'll also be conducting business. We've intercepted communications suggesting a major weapons transaction is being finalized this evening. What kind of transaction? The kind that could arm terrorist cells planning attacks on American soil. The kind your original team died trying to prevent. He'd handed me a small device disguised as a smartphone case. This will record audio and transmit encrypted data directly to our servers. Get close to Harrington during his speech, during the charity presentation, whenever he thinks he's safe among friends. And if I'm caught? Harrison's smile had been grim. Then you'll be just another PTSD case who couldn't handle civilian life. Plausible deniability all around. Now, 25 minutes before Harrington's scheduled speech, I moved through the reunion crowd with purpose, disguised as routine maintenance. The recording device was secured inside my cleaning cart, its sensitive microphones already activated and transmitting to Agent Harrison's team. Whatever was about to happen, at least someone would witness it. But as I worked, I noticed something that made my trained instincts flare with warning. 3 people I didn't recognize were positioned strategically around the ballroom, by the exits, near the stage where Harrington would speak, close to the main reception area. They wore reunion name tags, but their posture was wrong, their eyes too alert, their positioning too deliberate. Security. Professional security. And they were watching me. I caught a reflection in one of the mirrored pillars and saw a 4th figure speaking quietly into a concealed microphone. My 18 months of invisibility had just ended abruptly.
Someone knew exactly who I was and why I was here. As if summoned by my growing unease, Thomas Harrington entered the ballroom. He was exactly as I remembered from news conferences, silver-haired, commanding presence, the kind of man who could sell weapons to terrorists and then give speeches about supporting veterans without missing a beat. But it was the person beside him that made my breath catch in my throat. Senator Patricia Graves walked arm in arm with Harrington, smiling and nodding at reunion attendees like she belonged there, which I realized with dawning horror she did. She'd graduated from Pinewood High in 1975, 23 years before my class, but apparently close enough to warrant an invitation to our reunion. Or maybe she'd invited herself, knowing I would be here. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and her smile widened. She said something to Harrington, who looked directly at me for the first time. Then she began walking in my direction, weaving between tables with the confidence of a predator approaching cornered prey. I had about 90 seconds before she reached me, and I was trapped in a room full of people who had no idea they were about to witness something much more dangerous than a high school reunion. The real confrontation was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't the one with the element of surprise. Senator Graves approached with the measured pace of someone who held all the cards. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the same expression she wore during committee hearings when dismantling witnesses who dared to challenge her authority. I had maybe 60 seconds before she reached me, and running wasn't an option. Not with security positioned at every exit. Instead, I did what any good cleaning lady would do. I kept working. I bent down to wipe a spill near table 12, positioning myself so I could watch her approach in the reflection of a silver serving tray. My hand found the recording device hidden in my cart, its sensitive microphones already activated and transmitting to Agent Harrison's team. Whatever was about to happen, at least someone would witness it. "Samantha," Senator Graves said as she reached me, her voice carrying the warmth of old friends reuniting. "How wonderful to see you again." I straightened slowly, meeting her eyes with the bland expression I'd perfected over 18 months of being invisible. "Senator, I was not aware you'd be attending our reunion." "Oh, I make it a point to support military veterans wherever I find them, especially ones with such interesting backgrounds." The words hung between us like a loaded weapon. She knew, not just that I was here, but why I was here. The question was how much she knew and whether Agent Harrison's operation had been compromised from the beginning. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said carefully. "I'm just here doing my job." "Your job," she laughed, the sound carrying across the nearby tables and drawing curious glances. "Tell me, Samantha, do all cleaning services require their employees to have advanced training in electronic surveillance?" My blood turned to ice. She definitely knew about the recording equipment. "I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was pointless. The game was over before it had really begun. Senator Graves leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. 3 weeks ago, someone with very sophisticated skills accessed financial databases belonging to several defense contractors. The intrusion patterns were familiar. Military intelligence techniques specifically, the kind taught to specialized units like the 47th Tactical Intelligence Squadron.
I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. If they'd traced the database intrusions back to me, they knew I'd been investigating, which meant they'd had time to prepare, time to plan this confrontation. Even more interesting, she continued, was discovering that the only surviving number of that particular unit
was working as a cleaning lady. Such a remarkable coincidence. Thomas Harrington had joined us now, approaching from my left side with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything around him. Up close, he was more imposing than he appeared on television. Broad shoulders, steely gray eyes, and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Senator Graves," he said by way of greeting, though his eyes never left my face, "I see you found our little problem." Problem seems like such a harsh word, Thomas. I prefer to think of Samantha as an opportunity. I glanced around the ballroom, noting the positions of the security personnel. They'd moved closer, creating a loose perimeter around our little group. To the reunion attendees, it probably looked like VIPs having a friendly conversation with the help. None of them realized they were witnessing the opening moves of something much more dangerous. "An opportunity for what?" I asked. Harrington smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen. "To finish what we started in Brussels." The words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just admitting to the conspiracy, he was threatening to complete the job they'd started with my team. 4 soldiers were already dead. Apparently, he intended to make it 5. "You see, Samantha," Senator Graves said conversationally, "when we eliminated your unit, we thought we'd solved our problem permanently. Military intelligence can be so inconvenient when you're conducting sensitive international business." "You mean selling weapons to terrorists?" I said flatly. "I mean facilitating regional stability through strategic defense partnerships," Harrington corrected smoothly. "The fact that some of our clients have complicated political affiliations is simply the cost of doing business in an unstable world." I stared at him in disbelief. "Regional stability? Your weapons have been used in attacks that killed hundreds of civilians." "Acceptable losses in the pursuit of larger strategic objectives," Senator Graves said with the casual indifference of someone discussing quarterly earnings. "Besides, those deaths served American interests by justifying increased defense spending and expanded military contracts." The recording device in my cart was capturing every word, but I wondered if it would matter. If they were this confident, this open about their crimes, it suggested they had no intention of letting me leave this room alive. "The problem," Harrington continued, his voice taking on the brisk efficiency of a man conducting business, "is that you've been asking uncomfortable questions, accessing files you shouldn't have seen, making contacts with people who might actually listen to your theories." "Agent Harrison," Senator Graves added helpfully, "Defense Intelligence Agency, a principled young man, unfortunately, the kind who might actually try to act on evidence of corruption in the defense establishment." My heart sank. If they knew about Harrison, his entire operation might be compromised, which meant the recording I was making might be the only evidence that survived this night. "So here's what's going to happen," Harrington said, his voice taking on the brisk efficiency of a man conducting business. "You're going to have an accident. Tragic, really. A disturbed veteran struggling with PTSD, unable to cope with civilian life. She'll have some kind of breakdown at her high school reunion, perhaps become violent, force security to take defensive action." "Very sad," Senator Graves agreed. "But these things happen with damaged soldiers, which is why the committee recommended enhanced psychological screening for veterans transitioning to civilian work." I looked around the ballroom, seeing it with new eyes. The security personnel weren't just watching me, they were positioning themselves for whatever came next. The reunion attendees continued their conversations, oblivious to the execution being planned 15 feet away. "You won't get away with this," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We already have," Harrington replied. 17 times, actually. Your team in Brussels was just the beginning. Since then, we've eliminated 3 other intelligence units that were getting too close to our operations. The beauty of the system is that no one questions military casualties in overseas operations." 17. The number Agent Harrison had mentioned. 17 soldiers dead, so these people could profit from illegal weapons sales. Each time, Senator Graves' committee conducts a thorough investigation. Each time, they conclude that operational failures led to tragic but unavoidable casualties. Case closed, families notified, medals awarded posthumously. Very tidy.
And very profitable, Senator Graves added. Eliminating military intelligence interference has increased our overseas sales by 300% over the past 18 months. We're on track to gross over $2 billion this fiscal year. I felt sick. They were discussing the murder of American soldiers like it was a business strategy, which I realized it was. Systematic elimination of anyone who might interfere with their weapons trafficking operation. But tonight marks a new phase in our partnership. Harrington checked his watch. In exactly 12 minutes, I'm scheduled to give a speech about supporting veterans and present a donation check to the Wounded Warrior Foundation. Excellent publicity for my company's patriotic image. And immediately afterwards, we'll witness a tragic incident involving a mentally unstable veteran who couldn't handle being in the same room as successful people. Security will be forced to respond with appropriate measures.
They had it all planned out. Use Harrington's charity speech's cover, then stage my death as the breakdown of a disturbed veteran. The irony would be perfect. Killed at an event supposedly supporting people like me. But there was something they didn't know. Something I'd learned during 18 months of being invisible, of moving through the world unnoticed and underestimated. Cleaning carts carry more than mops and disinfectant. Hidden beneath the false bottom I'd installed 3 weeks ago was something I acquired through contacts who didn't ask questions about why a former colonel might need untraceable equipment. Not a weapon. I wasn't a killer, despite everything they'd done to me. Something better. A complete audio and video transmission system that had been broadcasting every word of this conversation to Agent Harrison's team, to FBI's servers, and to encrypted cloud storage that would automatically release to news organizations if I failed to check in within the next hour. "You know what the real tragedy is?" I said, reaching slowly into my cart. "What's that?" Senator Graves asked, apparently enjoying her moment of triumph. "You just confessed to murdering 17 American soldiers in front of cameras that have been recording everything for the past 5 minutes." The confident expressions on both their faces flickered for just a moment. "Cameras that," I continued, "are already uploading this footage to servers beyond your reach." Harrington's hand moved toward his jacket, probably reaching for a communication device to signal his security team. But I was faster. The evidence I pulled from my cart wasn't a weapon. It was something far more dangerous to people like them. The truth. The device I pulled from my cleaning cart looked innocuous enough. A tablet computer, the kind teachers and business executives carried everywhere. But the screen currently displayed something that made Thomas Harrington's face drain of color. A live video feed showing our conversation from 3 different angles, complete with audio levels and transmission indicators showing active uploads to multiple secure servers. "That's impossible," Senator Graves whispered, her political composure cracking for the first time. "We swept this room for surveillance equipment before the event." "You swept for conventional surveillance," I corrected, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "What you didn't account for was that cleaning carts have access to every room in the building, including the security office where your people set up their equipment." I turned the tablet so they could see the transmission data. For the past 48 hours, I've been installing micro cameras throughout this hotel. Elevators, service corridors, parking garage, even the private dining room where you met with Dmitry Volkov yesterday evening. Harrington's hand stopped reaching for his communication device. "Volkov isn't in the country." Suite 2247 checked in under the name Viktor Kozlov. He's been here since Tuesday, finalizing what I believe you called the largest arms transaction in company history. I swiped to another screen showing security footage of a man entering the hotel through a side entrance. 600 surface-to-air missiles, destination Syria, with a stop in Somalia where they'll be distributed to 3 different terrorist organizations. The color had completely drained from Senator Graves' face. "How could you possibly know?" "Because 18 months ago, I was very good at my job, and being invisible doesn't make you stupid, it makes you observant."
I gestured around the ballroom with its elegant chandeliers and well-dressed attendees. You chose this venue because it seemed safe, familiar territory, friendly faces, the perfect cover for conducting business. What you didn't consider was that the cleaning lady might be paying attention. Harrington's security team was starting to move, but I'd anticipated that. With a tap on my tablet screen, every smartphone in the ballroom suddenly chimed with an incoming message. Around us, people began pulling out their phones, reading with growing alarm and confusion. Victoria Ashworth's voice cut through the ambient noise first. "What the hell? This says Senator Graves and some defense contractor are here conducting illegal weapons sales? It's some kind of hoax," someone else called out, but more phones were chiming, more people reading the same message that was simultaneously being sent to news organizations, FBI field offices, and to congressional oversight committees across the country. The message was simple, but devastating. Live at the Grand Wellington Hotel, Senator Patricia Graves and Thomas Harrington caught on camera confessing to murdering 17 American soldiers to protect illegal arms sales to terrorist organizations. Full evidence being transmitted to authorities. Immediate federal response requested. "You brilliant, insane woman," Agent Harrison's voice came through my earpiece, which I realized Harrington and Graves could now hear. "Every news network in the country is mobilizing teams to your location. FBI tactical units are en route. You've got about 6 minutes before this place becomes a circus." Harrington tried to signal his security team, but the ballroom was already descending into chaos. Reunion attendees were calling spouses, posting on social media, and moving toward the exits where they encountered security personnel who suddenly looked less like discreet protection and more like armed guards blocking escape routes. "Thomas, we need to leave. Now." "We're not going anywhere," I said firmly, stepping between them and the nearest exit, "until federal agents arrive to place you both under arrest." Harrington laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You think we're just going to stand here and wait? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A defense contractor who values profits over American lives, and a senator who sold her oath of office to the highest bidder. But more importantly, I know something else."
I swiped to another screen on my tablet, this one showing a detailed organizational chart with photos and connecting lines. "Over the past 3 weeks, I didn't just investigate your conspiracy, I mapped it. Every bank account, every shell company, every government official receiving payments, every military officer who's been compromised." Senator Graves stared at the screen in horror. "That's classified information. How did you—" "I had help," I said simply. "Turns out there are still people in government who believe in their oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Agent Harrison wasn't working alone." The truth was more complex than I was letting on. Agent Harrison's original mission had been legitimate, but what he hadn't told me was that I wasn't the first person they'd recruited for this operation. Over the past year, they'd been building a case against what they suspected was a much larger conspiracy involving defense contractors, congressional oversight, and systematic elimination of military intelligence assets. My investigation had provided the final pieces of the puzzle, but more importantly, it had given them an opportunity to force the conspirators into the open. Tonight's confession wasn't just evidence, it was the trigger for a coordinated federal operation that had been months in the planning. "The beauty of your plan," I continued, "was its simplicity. Control congressional oversight through Senator Graves, eliminate military intelligence through targeted operations, and profit from the resulting chaos. But you made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" Harrington demanded. "You assumed that surviving members of eliminated units would just disappear quietly, that we'd be too broken, too discredited, too isolated to pose a threat." I smiled for the first time since this conversation had started. "But traumatized soldiers don't always break the way you expect them to. Sometimes they get angry, and sometimes they get smart." Through the ballroom windows, I could see the first news vans pulling into the hotel parking lot, their satellite dishes extending like mechanical flowers reaching for the sky.
The story was already breaking on social media, spreading faster than any damage control operation could contain it. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "I'd like you all to meet Senator Patricia Graves, who chairs the committee responsible for investigating military casualties, and Thomas Harrington, whose company has been selling weapons to the same terrorist organizations our soldiers die fighting." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Phones continued recording. Someone called for hotel security, not realizing that hotel security was part of the problem. Rebecca Thorne, whose State Department husband would undoubtedly be facing questions about this scandal, pushed through the crowd. "Samantha, are you saying they killed American soldiers?" 17 soldiers across 4 different operations, including Sergeant Maria Santos, Lieutenant James Crawford, Corporal David Kim, and Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, my team members who died in Brussels because these people needed them eliminated to protect their weapons trafficking operation. David Morrison, who'd been so skeptical earlier, stared at the tablet screen showing the organizational chart. Jesus Christ, half these names are people I know. Government officials, defense contractors, this goes all the way to the Pentagon. "Further," I said grimly, "the conspiracy includes elements of congressional oversight, defense procurement, and international arms regulation. They've been systematically corrupting the system designed to prevent exactly this kind of illegal activity." Agent Harrison's voice crackled through my earpiece again. "FBI tactical teams are in position. Hotel exits are secured. We've got eyes on Volkov attempting to leave through the parking garage. He's been detained." I looked at Harrington and Senator Graves, both of whom seemed to be aging years with each passing minute. "Your partner just got arrested trying to flee. The weapons shipment has been intercepted. Bank accounts are being frozen as we speak." "This is impossible," Senator Graves said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Even if you have evidence, do you have any idea how many careers this will destroy? How many government operations depend on the relationships we've built?" "You mean the relationships built on murdered American soldiers?" I asked. "I think the families of those 17 dead service members might have different priorities than protecting your careers." Harrington made one last desperate attempt at control. "You don't understand the complexity of international defense relationships. Sometimes, difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good." "The greater good? You sold weapons to organizations that use them to kill American civilians in terrorist attacks. You murdered soldiers who were trying to prevent those attacks? There is no greater good that justifies what you've done." Through the ballroom entrance, I could see federal agents in tactical gear beginning to move through the hotel. It was almost over. But as I watched Harrington's face cycle through anger, desperation, and resignation, I realized that capturing these two was only the beginning. The organizational chart on my tablet showed connections reaching into dozens of government agencies, military commands, and defense contractors. Tonight, we'd cut off the head of the conspiracy. Tomorrow, we'd have to deal with the body. And somewhere in the chaos of this ruined reunion, justice for my fallen soldiers was finally beginning to take shape. The ballroom doors burst open with military precision. 6 FBI agents in tactical gear swept through the entrance, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Agent Harrison led the formation, his young face grim with the satisfaction of months of preparation finally paying off. "FBI, nobody move!" The command echoed across the marble floors, and 200 reunion attendees froze like statues in an elaborate tableau. But Harrington wasn't done fighting. With the desperate energy of a cornered animal, he grabbed Senator Graves' arm and began pushing through the crowd toward the service entrance behind the stage. His security team moved to intercept the federal agents, hands reaching inside jackets for weapons that would turn this reunion into a battlefield. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice carrying the command authority I'd learned in 12 years of military service. "Everyone get down!" The reunion attendees dropped to the floor with surprising speed. Apparently, my earlier revelations had convinced them this wasn't just dinner theater. But Harrington's security team was drawing weapons, and I could see the technical calculation playing out in real time. 6 federal agents against 4 armed contractors in a crowded room full of civilians. Even if the good guys won, people were going to die. Unless someone changed the equation. I'd spent 18 months learning to be invisible, but before that, I'd spent 12 years learning to be decisive under pressure. The muscle memory kicked in without conscious thought. Assess threats, calculate options, execute the solution that saves the most lives. The fire alarm was mounted on the wall 15 feet from my position. I reached it in seconds, smashing the glass cover and pulling the lever. Immediately, the ballroom filled with strobing lights and deafening sirens that disoriented everyone equally. In the chaos that followed, I did something that surprised even me. Instead of taking cover, I moved toward the threat. Harrington's lead security man was raising his weapon toward Agent Harrison when I tackled him from the side. We went down hard, his gun skittering across the polished floor as we rolled toward the abandoned bandstand. He was bigger than me, trained in close combat, but he made a crucial mistake. He underestimated what 18 months of manual labor had done to my muscle mass and grip strength. When you scrub floors and move furniture 40 hours a week, you develop a different kind of fitness than gym workouts provide. Functional strength. The kind that lets a former colonel pin a professional security contractor to the ground until federal agents can reach them. Samuel Brennan, Agent Harrison said as he handcuffed the man I'd tackled, former Army Ranger, discharged for excessive force complaints, currently employed by Blackstone Security Solutions, a subsidiary of Harrington Defense. The other 3 security contractors had surrendered without firing a shot once they realized the FBI team was wearing full tactical gear and they were outgunned in every way that mattered. Professional mercenaries are pragmatic about losing battles. They save their lives to fight another day. But Thomas Harrington and Senator Graves had reached the service entrance and were pushing through into the hotel's back corridors. I could see them through the chaos, moving with the urgency of people who knew their empire was crumbling in real time. "They're heading for the parking garage," I called to Agent Harrison over the fire alarm. "There's a service elevator that goes directly to level B3. He nodded and spoke into his radio. "All units, suspects moving to parking level B3. Intercept and contain." The reunion attendees were being evacuated through the main exits while paramedics checked for injuries. Victoria Ashworth caught my arm as I passed, her earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that looked like awe. "Samantha, I had no idea about any of this, the military service, what you've been through." "Don't worry about it," I said, though not unkindly. "You couldn't have known." "But we should have known," she insisted. "We should have paid attention, should have asked questions instead of making assumptions." I looked around the ballroom at my former classmates, lawyers, doctors, business executives, all successful in their own ways, all forced to confront the reality that the quiet girl they'd ignored in high school had been fighting battles they couldn't imagine. Sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows. The people who do it don't always get recognition, but that doesn't make it less valuable. Rebecca Torn appeared at my other side, her State Department connections probably racing through the implications of tonight's revelations. "Samantha, when this comes out publicly, and it's already starting to, there are going to be congressional hearings. Your testimony could bring down dozens of officials." "Good," I said simply. 17 soldiers are dead because those officials prioritize profit over duty. They deserve accountability. Agent Harrison returned from coordinating the pursuit, his radio crackling with updates. "We've got both suspects in custody. Harrington and Graves were picked up in the parking garage along with 2 briefcases full of financial documents and communication devices. Volkov is cooperating fully. Apparently he's been expecting this for months." "Expecting it?" "He's been under surveillance by Russian intelligence as well. Turns out selling weapons to terrorist organizations makes you unpopular with multiple governments. He's been trying to negotiate an immunity deal for weeks." The fire alarm finally stopped, leaving the ballroom in relative quiet, broken only by the distant sound of news helicopters circling overhead. Through the windows, I could see the parking lot filled with federal vehicles, news vans, and emergency responders. What happens now? I asked. Harrison consulted his tablet, scrolling through what looked like a complex operational checklist. Now comes the hard part. We've got evidence of crimes involving dozens of government officials, multiple defense contractors, and international arms dealers. The investigation will take months, maybe years. And the families of the soldiers who died? They'll finally get the truth about what happened to their loved ones, and they'll get justice. It wasn't enough. Nothing could bring back Maria Santos or James Crawford or David Kim or Lisa Rodriguez, but it was more than they'd had yesterday. David Morrison approached hesitantly, still holding his phone, which displayed news alerts about the developing scandal. Samantha, there are reporters outside asking for interviews. The whole country is going to want to hear your story.
I considered that possibility. For 18 months, I'd been invisible by necessity. The idea of stepping into public spotlight, of having my face on television screens across America, felt surreal. Maybe later, I decided. Right now, I need to make some phone calls. To whom? The families of my soldiers. They deserve to hear about tonight from me, not from news reports. Agent Harrison nodded approvingly. There's a secure conference room upstairs we can use. The calls will need to be recorded for legal purposes, but you can have privacy. As we walked toward the elevator, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirrored wall. Gray uniform, wrinkled from the fight, hair mussed, face tired but determined. I still looked like a cleaning lady, but I felt like a colonel again. Agent Harrison, I said as the elevator doors closed, there's something else you should know. The evidence I gathered goes beyond just Harrington and Graves. What do you mean? The network includes active military officers, CIA operatives, and defense officials across multiple agencies. What we caught tonight is the tip of the iceberg. His expression grew serious. How big is this really? I thought about the organizational chart on my tablet, the months of investigation, the connections I'd traced across continents and through layers of classified operations. Big enough that some very powerful people are going to wake up tomorrow knowing their careers are over. Maybe big enough to change how America conducts defense policy. The elevator reached the conference room floor, and as the doors opened, I realized that tonight had been both an ending and a beginning. Justice for my fallen soldiers was just the first step in a much larger reckoning. And for the first time in 18 months, I was ready to stop being invisible. The secure conference room on the hotel's third floor felt like stepping back into my old world. Government-issued furniture, encrypted communication equipment, and Agent Harrison's team of analysts setting up laptops with classified access protocols. For a moment, I could almost forget the 18 months had happened. Mrs. Santos, this is Colonel Samantha Fowler. I served with your daughter, Maria. The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats. When Elena Santos finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a grief that had never fully healed. Colonel, but they told me the official report said there was no surviving officer from Maria's unit. The reports were false, I said gently. Mrs. Santos, I need you to know that Maria died serving her country with honor. But more than that, I need you to know that the people responsible for her death are finally going to face justice. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes of explaining what had really happened in Brussels, what Maria's final mission had been trying to accomplish, and why the official story had been a lie designed to protect criminals. By the time I hung up the phone, Elena Santos was crying, not just with grief, but with relief that someone finally acknowledged her daughter died for something that mattered. 3 more calls followed. James Crawford's father, a retired Marine, who'd spent 18 months questioning why his son's mission had gone wrong. David Kim's widow, who'd remarried but still kept her first husband's medals in a place of honor. Lisa Rodriguez's mother, who'd moved to Florida but still attended every military memorial service she could find. Each conversation was different, but they all ended the same way, with families finally understanding that their loved ones hadn't died due to incompetence or bad luck,
but because they'd been betrayed by the system they'd sworn to protect. That was the hardest part of the cover-up, I told Agent Harrison as I finished the last call. Not just hiding the truth about what happened, but forcing the families to believe their soldiers had died meaninglessly. Agent Harrison was reviewing files on his laptop, cross-referencing the evidence I'd gathered with FBI intelligence databases. The psychological warfare aspect is what makes this case so particularly heinous. They didn't just commit murder, they destroyed the meaning of that sacrifice for the families left behind. Through the conference room windows, I could see the media circus growing outside. News trucks from every major network, satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers, reporters doing live broadcasts with the Grand Wellington Hotel as their backdrop. Colonel Fowler, this is a new voice, entered the conversation. Agent Harrison gestured toward his laptop screen, which now showed a video conference connection to a woman I didn't recognize. This is Director Sarah Chen, Counterintelligence Division, FBI. I wanted to personally thank you for your service tonight. Just doing my duty, Director. Your duty ended with your discharge 18 months ago. What you did tonight was something entirely different. Director Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. Colonel, I need you to understand the scope of what you've uncovered. The evidence you've provided has triggered what will likely be the largest government corruption investigation in modern American history. Agent Harrison turned his laptop so I could see the organizational chart they'd been building from my data. Names, photos, and connecting lines covered the screen like a spiderweb of corruption. 47 government officials at various levels, 12 active military officers, 6 defense contractors beyond Harrington's company, and evidence of weapon sales that funded terrorist operations in 7 different countries. I studied the chart, recognizing some names, but surprised by others. General Patricia Hardwick is involved? The same general who led your discharge hearing? It turns out she's been receiving consulting payments from Harrington Defense Solutions for the past 3 years. Agent Harrison's voice carried barely controlled anger. She fast-tracked your discharge specifically to prevent you from investigating further.
The irony was staggering. The woman who destroyed my career had been working for the criminals I'd been trying to catch. There's more, Director Chen said. We've identified at least 8 other military intelligence operations that were compromised over the past 2 years. Operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Eastern Europe. Conservative estimate is that 63 American service members died as a direct result of intelligence leaks from this network. 63. The number hit me like a physical blow. Maria, James, David, and Lisa had been just the beginning. How long before this becomes public? I asked. It already is public, Agent Harrison said, pulling up news websites on another screen. Every major network is running the story. Social media is exploding. Congressional leadership is calling for emergency hearings. I watched news anchors discussing the scandal with the kind of breathless intensity usually reserved for natural disasters or presidential elections. The headline on one channel read, "Massive defense corruption exposed. Senator and defense CEO arrested at high school reunion." They're calling you the cleaning lady colonel, Agent Harrison noted with what might have been amusement. Social media seems to love the story of the underestimated veteran who brought down a conspiracy. I hate that nickname already, I said. Director Chen spoke up from the laptop screen. Colonel, we need to discuss your future role in this investigation. The prosecution of this case will require extensive testimony, document authentication, and technical explanation of the evidence you gathered. Whatever you need. It's going to mean months of depositions, grand jury appearances, and eventually public testimony at congressional hearings. Your life is about to become very public, very scrutinized. I considered that prospect. 18 months ago, I'd lost everything: career, identity, purpose. Tonight, I'd found something I hadn't expected, a chance to ensure that my soldiers' deaths meant something. Director, with respect, my life stopped being private the moment they murdered my team.
If going public is what it takes to get justice, then that's what I'll do." A knock on the conference room door interrupted our conversation. Agent Harrison checked his watch and nodded to his team. "That'll be the press liaison. We need to decide how much we're releasing tonight." "Everything," I said immediately. "Release everything that won't compromise ongoing operations." "Samantha, may I call you Samantha? The story gets out, in full detail. There's no going back to anonymity. You'll be testifying before Congress on live television. Your face will be on every news channel in the country." I thought about the past 18 months, the invisibility, the dismissive comments, the assumption that I was just another failure who couldn't handle civilian life. Then I thought about Maria Santos laughing at something stupid David Kim had said during a briefing, James Crawford teaching Lisa Rodriguez how to field strip a rifle in record time, the family I lost, and the justice they deserved. "Good," I said firmly. "Let them see who I really am." Director Chen smiled from the laptop screen. "Colonel, there's one more thing. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you tomorrow. There's been discussion about restoring your military rank and offering you a position with the new task force that will be created to investigate defense contractor relationships." The offer caught me completely off guard. Return to active duty? Restore my rank? 6 hours ago, I'd been scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Of course. But Samantha, may I call you Samantha? The country needs people like you in positions where they can prevent this kind of corruption from happening again." Agent Harrison was gathering his files, preparing for the press briefing that would officially break the story to the world. "Ready to face the cameras, Colonel?" I looked down at my gray cleaning uniform, wrinkled and stained from the evening's confrontation. Then I looked at the organizational chart showing the network of corruption that had cost 63 American lives. "Agent Harrison, before we talk to the press, I need 5 minutes to call my mother." "Your mother?" "She's 84 years old and lives in a retirement community in Phoenix. In about an hour, she's going to turn on the evening news and see her daughter's face connected to the biggest government scandal in decades." I smiled for what felt like the first time in months. I'd rather she heard it from me first. As I dialed her number, I realized that everything was about to change again. But this time, the change felt like coming home rather than being exiled. This time, I wouldn't be invisible. The call to my mother lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I timed it on Agent Harrison's secure conference room clock. 4 minutes to explain that her daughter, who she thought was struggling with post-military adjustment, had just exposed the largest defense corruption scandal in American history. "Samantha Marie Fowler," she said in the tone that had disciplined me through childhood, "are you telling me you've been lying to me for 18 months about what you've been doing?" "Not lying, Mom. Just protecting you from worrying about something you couldn't change. And now?" I looked around the conference room at the FBI agents, the evidence charts, the secure communication equipment that would soon broadcast my story to the entire world. Now everything changes. The pause that followed contained 30 years of my mother's experience raising a daughter who'd always chosen the difficult path. "Are you safe, sweetheart?" "Safer than I've been in 18 months. "Then I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud too."
Agent Harrison gestured toward his watch. The press briefing was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, and media representatives were already gathering in the hotel's main conference room. I nodded and ended the call with promises to visit Phoenix as soon as the immediate crisis passed. "Ready?" he asked. I looked down at my cleaning uniform one last time, then made a decision that surprised even me. "Actually, no, I'm not going down there dressed like this." "Samantha, there's no time to—" "There's always time to do things right, Agent Harrison." I stood up, straightening my shoulders into the posture I'd learned over 12 years of military service. I spent 18 months being invisible in this uniform. Tonight, I represent every soldier who died because of this conspiracy. I'm not doing that dressed like someone who doesn't matter.
20 minutes later, I walked into the press briefing wearing Agent Harrison's backup suit jacket over a white shirt borrowed from the hotel's management office. It wasn't perfect, but it was professional. More importantly, it sent the message I wanted to send. I wasn't the broken veteran they'd tried to create. I was the colonel who'd survived their attempts to silence me. The conference room was packed beyond capacity. Reporters from every major news network, their cameras creating a wall of lenses focused on the small podium where I would soon stand. Behind the media, I could see familiar faces: Victoria Ashworth, Rebecca Thorne, David Morrison, and other classmates who'd stayed to witness this surreal conclusion to what should have been a simple reunion. Agent Harrison stepped to the podium first, his voice carrying the formal authority of federal law enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's events have resulted in the arrest of Senator Patricia Graves and defense contractor Thomas Harrington on charges of conspiracy, treason, and the murder of 17 United States service members. The room erupted with questions, camera flashes, and the kind of controlled chaos that marks major breaking news. Agent Harrison raised his hand for silence. The evidence was gathered over an 18-month period by the person who will now address your questions, Colonel Samantha Fowler, United States Army Intelligence. I approached the podium with the same measured pace I'd used walking into hostile territory overseas. The room fell silent as I adjusted the microphone and looked out over the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, all focused intently on the woman who'd been invisible just hours before. "My name is Colonel Samantha Fowler," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. 18 months ago, I was discharged from the United States Army under false pretenses after my intelligence unit was eliminated in what officials called an operational failure. I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room. Tonight, I can prove that my soldiers, Sergeant Maria Santos, Lieutenant James Crawford, Corporal David Kim, and Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, were murdered by American officials who were selling weapons to terrorist organizations. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Reporters shouted questions, cameras captured every expression, and I could see the story spreading in real time as media representatives typed updates on their phones. The conspiracy includes 47 government officials, 12 active military officers, and multiple defense contractors. Over the past 2 years, 63 American service members have died in operations that were compromised to protect illegal arms sales worth over $2 billion. A reporter from CNN raised her hand. "Colonel Fowler, how did you gather this evidence while working as a cleaning lady?" I almost smiled at the question. Being invisible has significant advantages in intelligence gathering. When people assume you can't understand what you're seeing or hearing, they become careless about what they say and do in your presence. "But why didn't you come forward sooner?" This from a Washington Post journalist. "Because 18 months ago, no one would have believed a discharged soldier with a PTSD designation in her file. I needed irrefutable evidence and credible allies within the federal law enforcement community." The questions continued for 40 minutes. Technical details about the evidence, legal implications of the charges, timeline for prosecutions, and the personal cost of my investigation. Through it all, I maintained the professional demeanor I'd learned in military briefings, but inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Brussels. Purpose. "Colonel Fowler," called a reporter from ABC News, "what's next for you personally?" I considered the question carefully. The Secretary of Defense had offered to restore my rank and position. The FBI wanted my continued cooperation in the expanding investigation. Congress would require extensive testimony. Publishers were probably already drafting book deal offers. But there was something else, something more important than any of those opportunities. What's next is ensuring that the families of 63 dead soldiers finally understand that their loved ones died serving their country, not due to incompetence or failure. What's next is making sure this kind of systematic corruption can never again cost American lives. "Are you returning to active military duty?"
That decision is still under consideration, but whether I wear a uniform or not, my commitment to protecting American service members continues. The briefing concluded with Agent Harrison providing contact information for official FBI statements and legal proceedings. As the media began filing out, several of my former classmates approached the podium.
Victoria Ashworth reached me first, her earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. Samantha, I owe you an apology. We all do. You don't owe me anything, Victoria. You judged based on the information you had. But that's just it, Rebecca Thorne added, joining our conversation. We didn't ask for information. We made assumptions based on appearances and left it at that. David Morrison, who'd been skeptical about my military claims just hours earlier, extended his hand formally. Colonel, it's an honor to have known you, even if I was too stupid to realize it at the time. I shook his hand, recognizing the genuine respect in his gesture. David, some stories take time to unfold completely. Tonight just happened to be when this one came together. As my classmates dispersed, Agent Harrison approached with an update that changed everything yet again. Colonel, we just received word from the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. But that's not the significant development. What is? 3 other discharged veterans have come forward in the past 2 hours, all former intelligence specialists, all discharged under suspicious circumstances after operations that resulted in American casualties. I felt a chill of recognition. They were eliminated the same way I was. It appears so, which means the conspiracy may be even larger than we initially suspected, and you may not be the only survivor they failed to silence completely. Looking around the emptying conference room, I realized tonight had been both an ending and a beginning. Justice for my fallen soldiers was assured, but there were apparently other soldiers, other operations, other families who deserved the truth. The invisible cleaning lady was gone forever. In her place stood someone with a much more complex mission ahead. And for the first time in 18 months, I was ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks later, I sat in the witness chair before the Senate Intelligence Committee, facing the same panel that had rubber-stamped my discharge 18 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the packed hearing room. The woman they'd tried to silence was now the star witness in the most significant congressional investigation in decades. The committee chair, Senator Robert Martinez, had replaced Senator Graves after her arrest. His opening statement set the tone for what everyone knew would be a historic session. Colonel Fowler, your testimony today represents more than just evidence in a criminal case. It represents a fundamental examination of how our government protects, or fails to protect, the men and women who serve in our nation's most sensitive operations. I adjusted the microphone, looking out over the gallery packed with families of fallen soldiers, journalists, and government officials whose careers hung in the balance of my testimony. In the front row sat Elena Santos, Maria's mother, who had flown in from Texas specifically to hear this moment. Thank you, Senator Martinez. I want to honor the memory of the 63 American service members who died because of the corruption we're examining today. They served with distinction, and they deserved better from the system they swore to protect. The questioning that followed was thorough and technical. For 3 hours, I walked the committee through the evidence, financial records, communication intercepts, operational timelines, and the systematic elimination of intelligence units that threatened the conspiracy. But it was Senator Karen Walsh's question that cut to the heart of everything. Colonel Fowler, you spent 18 months working as a cleaning lady after being discharged from the military. During that time, did you ever consider simply walking away from all of this? I took a moment to consider my answer, thinking about those long nights scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans, wondering if anyone would ever believe the truth. Senator, every day I considered walking away. Every day, I thought about how much easier it would be to accept the official story, to let my soldiers' deaths remain classified as operational failures, to build a quiet civilian life and forget about justice. What stopped me? A promise I made to myself the day I became an officer, that I would never abandon my soldiers, under my command, living or dead. Walking away would have meant abandoning Maria Santos, James Crawford, David Kim, and Lisa Rodriguez to a lie that protected their killers. The hearing room was completely silent.
But there was something else, I continued. During my investigation, I discovered that other intelligence units had been eliminated using the same methods. Other families had been told their soldiers died due to incompetence rather than corruption. I couldn't walk away knowing there were more victims, more families who deserved the truth. Senator Martinez leaned forward. Colonel, you mentioned other victims. Can you elaborate on what the investigation has discovered since your initial revelations? This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to reveal just how extensive the conspiracy had been. Senator, in the 6 weeks since the arrests at my high school reunion, 17 more discharged veterans have come forward. All were eliminated from intelligence positions after discovering evidence of illegal arms sales or other forms of defense contractor corruption. A murmur ran through the hearing room. The media had reported some of these developments, but the full scope hadn't been revealed publicly. These veterans represent operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. The pattern was always the same. Discover evidence of wrongdoing, report it through proper channels, and then face swift discharge on fabricated charges. How many soldiers died in total?
Current estimates put the number at 112 American service members killed in operations that were compromised to protect illegal defense contractor activities. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 112 families who had buried their loved ones, believing they died in legitimate military operations, never knowing they'd been betrayed by their own government. Colonel, Senator Walsh said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, what is your assessment of how deep this corruption reaches? I had prepared for this question, knowing it would be the most important answer I gave. Senator, the investigation has identified systematic corruption involving 3 major defense contractors, 47 government officials across multiple agencies, 23 active military officers, and coordination with international arms dealers in 12 countries. The financial scoop appears to exceed $5 billion in illegal transactions over the past 4 years. And the institutional response? Secretary of Defense Morrison has implemented new oversight protocols for defense contractor relationships. The FBI has created a dedicated task force for investigating military contractor corruption, and Congress has introduced legislation requiring independent oversight of intelligence operations involving private defense companies. Senator Martinez consulted his notes. Colonel Fowler, you've been offered reinstatement to active duty with a promotion to full colonel and command of the new Military Contractor Oversight Division. Have you made a decision about that offer? This was the question everyone had been waiting for. The question that would determine not just my future, but the signal it would send about accountability and justice in military service. Senator, I have decided to accept the position. The soldiers who died in these operations deserve more than posthumous justice. They deserve systemic changes that ensure their sacrifice was not in vain. The applause that followed was immediate and sustained. In the gallery, I could see Elena Santos wiping tears from her eyes, finally witnessing official acknowledgement that her daughter had died serving her country with honor. But I wasn't finished. However, I want to be clear about something. My return to active duty isn't about personal vindication or career advancement. It's about ensuring that no other intelligence professional faces what I faced, being punished for doing their job, and protecting American lives. Senator Martinez nodded approvingly. Colonel, what would you say to other veterans who might be facing similar situations, who have evidence of wrongdoing but fear coming forward? I looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting this hearing live across the country, knowing that somewhere other discharged veterans might be watching and wondering if they should speak up about their own experiences. I would say that the truth has power even when institutions try to suppress it, that doing the right thing is never the easy thing, but it's always the necessary thing. And that you're not alone. There are people who will listen, who will investigate, and who will fight for justice. The hearing concluded with Senator Martinez announcing that the committee would be releasing a comprehensive report within 60 days, along with recommendations for legislative action to prevent similar corruption in the future. As I left the witness table, Elena Santos approached me in the hallway outside the hearing room. Colonel, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes,
Maria would be proud to know that her death led to all of this, to justice for so many families. Mrs. Santos, Maria's courage in that final operation in Brussels made all of this possible. She and the others didn't die in vain. We embraced briefly, two women bound by loss, but strengthened by the knowledge that truth had finally prevailed. Later that evening, I stood in my new Pentagon office, the same building where I'd once worked before Brussels, before the conspiracy, before 18 months of invisibility. The nameplate on my door read, Colonel Samantha Fowler, Director, Military Contractor Oversight Division. Through my window, I could see Arlington National Cemetery in the distance, where so many service members rested under white stones that told stories of sacrifice and service. Some of those stones marked the graves of soldiers who had died because of the corruption we exposed. Their families now knew the truth. My phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Harrison. "Congratulations, Colonel. The first meeting of your oversight task force is scheduled for Monday. 17 other agencies are sending representatives." I typed back, "Ready to get back to work." As I prepared to leave for the day, I noticed something on my desk that hadn't been there that morning. A small metal nameplate, freshly engraved. Not the Colonel's eagle that I'd carried as a reminder of who I'd been, but something new. It read, Director, Military Contractor Oversight Division. Established in memory of the 112 service members who died protecting American interests overseas. For the first time since Brussels, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not invisible, not dismissed, but serving with purpose in a position that could prevent others from experiencing what my soldiers and I had endured. Justice had been served, but more importantly, systematic change was beginning. And somewhere in the halls of the Pentagon, in congressional hearing rooms, and in defense contractor boardrooms across the country, people now understood that the quiet professionals who serve in America's most sensitive operations would no longer be abandoned when they discovered inconvenient truths. The cleaning lady was gone forever. In her place stood an officer with a mission that honored the dead by protecting the living.
1 year later, I stood at Arlington National Cemetery on a crisp October morning, watching as honor guard folded the American flag over the grave of Sergeant Maria Santos. It wasn't her burial. That had happened 18 months ago while her family believed she'd died due to operational failure. This was something different. This was the ceremony the Army calls setting the record straight. Elena Santos held the folded flag while General Patricia Morrison, the new Secretary of Defense, spoke words that should have been said long ago. Sergeant Santos died in service to her country while conducting a classified intelligence operation that saved countless American lives. Her sacrifice, and the sacrifice of her teammates, represents the highest traditions of military service. Around us, 111 other families stood at similar grave sites throughout Arlington, each receiving the recognition their loved ones had earned but been denied. The Day of Accountability, as the media had dubbed it, was the largest single ceremony in the cemetery's history. But this wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about fundamentally changing how America protects the people who serve in its most dangerous and sensitive operations. After the ceremony, I walked the short distance to the Pentagon, where my office had become the nerve center for the most comprehensive military reform initiative since World War II. The Military Contractor Oversight Division now employed 247 people, investigators, analysts, legal specialists, and victim advocates, all dedicated to ensuring that what happened to my team could never happen again. My deputy director, Lieutenant Colonel Warkus Webb, one of the 17 survivors who had come forward after my testimony, was waiting with the monthly report. "Colonel, the numbers are significant," he said, spreading files across my conference table. "In the past 12 months, we've prevented 14 operations that showed signs of intelligence compromise. We've identified and removed 32 military officers who had undisclosed financial relationships with defense contractors, and we've recovered over $800 million in illegal payments." But the statistics that mattered most to me were simpler. 0 American intelligence professionals had been discharged for reporting suspected corruption. 0 operations had been compromised due to contractor influence. 0 families were receiving false explanations for their loved ones' deaths. "What about the international cooperation agreements?" I asked. "Signed and implemented with 12 allied nations.
The NATO Intelligence Integrity Protocol goes into effect next month, and the UN Security Council has adopted our framework for investigating defense contractor corruption in peacekeeping operations. The scope of change had surprised everyone, including me. What had started as justice for 4 murdered soldiers had become a global movement toward transparency and accountability in military-industrial relationships. My secure phone rang with a call I'd been expecting. Director Sarah Chen from FBI Counterintelligence had been coordinating with international law enforcement agencies on prosecutions related to our investigation. Colonel, I wanted to give you the final tally before it's announced publicly tomorrow. Thomas Harrington was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Senator Graves received 25 to life. 43 other officials have been convicted with sentences ranging from 10 to 40 years. And the defense contractors? Harrington Defense Solutions has been permanently barred from government contracts and liquidated with assets distributed to victim families. 2 other major contractors have been restructured under federal oversight. The industry has gotten the message. This kind of corruption will be met with complete destruction of their business model. After ending the call, I walked to my office window overlooking the Potomac River. In the distance, I could see the Capitol Dome, where Congress had passed the most sweeping military oversight legislation in modern history. The Fowler-Santos Military Accountability Act, named after my investigation and Maria's sacrifice, had created permanent protections for intelligence professionals and established independent oversight of all military contractor relationships. But perhaps the most important change was cultural rather than legal. Last month, I'd received a letter from a young Army intelligence officer serving in Afghanistan. She discovered evidence that her unit's communications were being monitored by an unauthorized source, possibly a contractor with financial interests in prolonging regional conflicts. 2 years ago, she might have hesitated to report it, knowing the career risks involved. Instead, she'd used the secure reporting system we had established, triggered an immediate investigation, and within 48 hours had helped identify and eliminate a threat that could have cost American lives. She'd been commended for her vigilance rather than punished for asking uncomfortable questions. That officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, David Kim's younger sister who had enlisted to honor her brother's memory, represented the new generation of military professionals who understood that protecting America sometimes meant challenging American institutions. My assistant knocked on the door, reminding me that I had a video conference call with veteran advocacy groups in 15 minutes. These monthly calls had become important parts of my role, not just overseeing current operations, but ensuring that veterans who had been silenced or discredited in the past knew they had allies and advocates. As I prepared for the call, I reflected on the question that reporters still asked me regularly. Was the personal cost worth it? 18 months of invisibility, of being dismissed and underestimated, of questioning whether I'd ever matter again. 18 months of manual labor while carrying the weight of knowing that my soldiers had been murdered by the system they had served. The answer was complicated. The personal cost had been enormous, relationships lost, career derailed, identity shattered. But the alternative cost would have been worse. 112 families would still believe their loved ones had died meaninglessly. Corrupt officials would still be selling weapons to terrorists. Future intelligence operations would still be compromised by contractors prioritizing profit over American lives. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who have already lost everything that mattered to them personally. Sometimes the only people who can challenge systemic corruption are those who no longer have careers or reputations to protect.
I'd learned that being underestimated was not a weakness. It was camouflage that allowed you to operate effectively against powerful opponents who couldn't conceive that a threat might come from someone they considered beneath their notice. The video call connected me with veteran advocates from across the country, including several who had come forward with their own stories of being silenced after discovering wrongdoing. We spent an hour discussing new cases, systemic challenges, and the ongoing work of cultural change within military institutions. As the call ended, my calendar showed one more appointment for the day, a meeting with a group of military academy cadets who were writing their senior theses on intelligence ethics and institutional accountability.
These young officers in training represented something profound, a generation that would enter military service with a fundamentally different understanding of their obligations. They knew that loyalty to country sometimes meant disloyalty to corrupt institutions. They understood that following orders sometimes meant disobeying corrupt superiors. Most importantly, they knew that the quiet professionals who serve in intelligence operations would no longer be abandoned when they discovered inconvenient truths. That evening, I returned to my apartment, not the studio above the dry cleaner where I'd lived as a cleaning lady, but a place befitting a Pentagon director. On my kitchen table was a package that had arrived that afternoon. Inside was a hand-carved wooden plaque from Elena Santos with a simple inscription: for Colonel Samantha Fowler, who kept her promise to never abandon her soldiers, with gratitude from the Santos family and all the families you brought home to the truth. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the reunion that had started everything. My classmates who had dismissed me as just a cleaner had been forced to confront their assumptions about worth and value. Victoria Ashworth had become an advocate for veteran employment programs. Rebecca Thorne had left her husband's State Department social circle to work with military families dealing with bureaucratic challenges. David Morrison had started a nonprofit organization supporting discharged veterans who were fighting to clear their names. Even people who had been bystanders to injustice had been changed by witnessing its exposure and resolution. But the deepest change was in me. I'd learned that identity isn't determined by job title or uniform or public recognition. It's determined by the choices you make when everything else is stripped away, when you're invisible, when you're dismissed, when you have nothing left to lose. That's when you discover who you really are. I was a colonel who had kept her promise to her soldiers. I was an intelligence professional who had chosen truth over convenience. I was a woman who had transformed personal tragedy into systemic change. And I was someone who understood that real courage isn't the absence of fear or doubt or despair. Real courage is choosing to act on your principles when acting costs you everything you thought you wanted. Some battles are won with weapons and tactics. Others are won with patience and persistence, and the absolute refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. But when it speaks with the voice of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for, even whispers can bring down empires. The cleaning lady was gone forever. The colonel would continue the mission until every American service member could serve with confidence that their sacrifice would never be betrayed by the system they had sworn to protect. That promise wasn't just to the 112 soldiers who had died. It was to every person who had ever chosen duty over comfort, service over safety, and truth over convenience. And it was a promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life.